Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to speak here tonight. Democracy is under attack around the world. In recent decades, authoritarianism has taken hold in the Philippines, Turkey, Nicaragua, and Thailand, while authoritarian powers China and Russia have grown stronger. The crisis of global authoritarianism came to a head last year when Russia invaded Ukraine and attempted to crush its democratic government. And looking forward, autocratic China poses a threat to Taiwanese democracy. Tonight, I am so proud to defend the motion this House would fight to defend democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law outside the West. I believe that the US and Western Europe have both a moral obligation as well as a strategic imperative to protect democracy globally. Before I get into my argument, I will introduce the opposition speakers. First, you'll hear from Matthew Dick, president of the Oxford Union. Matthew is a distinguished debater and is well known for his efforts to platform fresh voices here at Oxford. President Dick, I'm flattered that you've invited me to speak here tonight, given that I'm not a porn star or a transphobe. The second opposition speaker is Stephen Zunez, a professor of political science and the chair of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of San Francisco. Professor Zunez believes in the live and let live doctrine of US foreign policy. Yes, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping get things wrong from time to time, but there's a lot of blame to go around. Professor Zunez was very excited when President Trump said, "You think our country is so innocent? We've got a lot of killers too." Now, some people say that Professor Zunez is a blame America first intellectual, but that's totally unfair. He also hates the UK and France. The third opposition speaker is a late substitution, Sultan Koker, the press and sponsorship officer for the union. Now, I don't know that much about Sultan, but his LinkedIn profile says, "I am an ambitious and able student with high GCSE grades and a strong interest in an array of subjects." Particularly history, languages, and literature. I possess powerful analytical abilities, as well as the ability to think uniquely and creatively. What a tremendous late addition to his side. After President Dick's first choice was arrested by the Pakistani government for elections tampering and political corruption. If LinkedIn is any indicator, my side will have our hands full as Sultan weaves together a speech combining world-class analytical abilities with clever literary allusions. By the way, no one can accuse Sultan of political corruption. He's never won an election. Last year, he ran for union secretary and lost. And he ran unopposed for Lincoln College JCR and still lost. The final speaker for the opposition is Peter Galbraith. A lifelong diplomat, Mr. Galbraith was the US ambassador to Croatia and served in multiple positions in the Middle East. He's one of America's foremost experts on nation building, with a track record of success wherever he goes. Ambassador Galbraith, the very stable democracies of Iraq and Afghanistan thank you for your service. Mr. President, these are your guests, and they are most welcome. Tonight we are debating the foreign policy of Western nations, and as an American, I'll be focusing on the US. And you know you can trust America. Over the past 20 years, we've sent you leaders of the free world, ranging from George W. Bush to Donald J. Trump to George A. Santos. And we never get it wrong. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. As President Bush likes to say, mission accomplished. So in this debate, you'll be hearing a lot about liberal democracy. Democracy is a political system in which governments are chosen in free and fair elections, and all citizens possess the civil liberties necessary to inform themselves about and organize opposition to these governments. In contrast to the equality, accountability, and freedom of democracy, under authoritarianism, a small number of powerful people dictate policy with few checks and balances. I believe that liberal democracies like the US and the UK have a responsibility to defend democracy around the world. But what does it actually mean to defend democracy? I want to acknowledge that we're having this debate following 20 years of failed Western interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan. But it is not the burden of the proposition side to argue in favor of nation building. The word defend in the motion implies protecting something that already exists. In the Middle East, the US did not defend existing institutions, but rather attempted to create new democratic institutions. No, thank you. Therefore, the proposition will argue that the US and its Western European allies should protect existing democratic regimes from authoritarian threats. In this debate, the proposition must prove that, on balance, it is beneficial for the West to provide military support to democratic states under attack by authoritarians, whereas the opposition must prove that this is not true and that this is a net negative. Today, Ukraine is ground zero for the West's defense of democracy. The continued supply of international military aid to Ukraine is critical to preserving democracy in the region. Looking forward, the next great challenge to global democracy is China's threat to conquer Taiwan. China would almost certainly triumph over Taiwan in the event of a bilateral conflict. However, if the US and its European allies commit weapons and soldiers to defend Taiwan, China can be defeated and democracy can be protected. I commend President Biden's explicit, renewed commitment to defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese attack. Now, my Putinist and Xi-loving opposition might tell you that intervention risks escalation. But the greater risk is that authoritarianism overtakes democracy as the dominant regime type globally. If the US and Western European states are too afraid to stand up to Russian and Chinese aggression, these authoritarian regimes will be emboldened to conquer more territory, just as Hitler was during World War II. Neville Chamberlain thought that Hitler would be satisfied with just annexing the Sudetenland, but then he seized the rest of Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Poland. And then his eyes moved to France and the UK. And we all know what happened next. We cannot make the same mistake and expect that Putin will magically end his territorial ambitions after conquering Ukraine, or that Xi Jinping will kick up his feet and call it a day after taking Taiwan. Crimea is a more modern example supporting this point. After Russia invaded the Crimean Peninsula in 2014, President Obama and his Western allies responded with weakness. They imposed sanctions on Russia, but refused to provide offensive military aid to Ukraine. This enabled Russia to annex Crimea, forcing its 2 million citizens to live under Putin's authoritarian regime. Emboldened by the inadequate Western response to Crimea, Putin invaded Ukraine again last year, this time with the bolder aim of conquering the entire country. President Zelensky of Ukraine said it best. If the world had punished Russia for what it did in 2014, there would be none of the horrors of the invasion in Ukraine in 2022. The cases of Crimea and Nazi Germany show that Western weakness empowers authoritarian leaders to seize more land and provokes further aggression. If the West does not protect Taiwan, this could encourage China to conquer more territory in the South China Sea, impacting nations such as the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Similarly, if the West stops sending military aid to Ukraine, Putin could be emboldened to forge ahead with his plan to recreate the Soviet empire. The West has a moral obligation to prevent the spread of authoritarianism around the world. The US and Western European countries were founded on the principles of freedom, equality, and the rule of law. We must take a stand to protect these values. Defending democracy is not only a moral imperative, it's also a strategic imperative. If more countries fall under the sway of authoritarian powers such as China or Russia, this could diminish American and British influence globally. For all these reasons, I am so proud to propose the motion that this House would fight to defend democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law outside the West. Thank you.